Ladies and gentlemen, this is breaking news. A panel of jurors has found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty Tuesday on all three charges in connection with the May 2020 death of George Floyd. After one of the most closely watched criminal trials in recent memory, Chauvin, 45, was charged with second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. With Americans on edge as they awaited the verdict, the jury announced that it has found him guilty across the board. I want to give my thoughts really quickly. I gave my thoughts last week on this. Number one, I support law enforcement. I'm a member of the 1199 Foundation that supports the California Highway Patrol. It's a really beautiful, awesome organization. And I do support law enforcement. I support law enforcement throughout the country. I think that everyone needs police, firemen. I think that you need this as a society. However, I do believe that Chauvin was guilty on all three counts. And I do believe that George Floyd was murdered. I don't think that those two vantage points are contradictory. You can support law enforcement, which is what I do. But you can also say, okay, there are certain scenarios that are unique in terms of, the vast majority of interactions. You have tens of thousands and millions upon millions of interactions every year between police officers and people of all backgrounds. This Minneapolis former officer Chauvin does not represent all law enforcement officials. I think that the vast majority, a small tiny fraction, end in tragedy, but the vast majority are peaceful interactions or positive, good interactions where you are asking a law enforcement official to help save your life or help protect you from a violent criminal. The same people who would yell, okay, defund the police, would be the same people who would call the police if, God forbid, they needed urgent assistance. You look at the numbers. The numbers show that the vast majority of policemen and policewomen, people in the police and law enforcement, are good, honest, hardworking people, and they risk their lives all the time. They risk their lives every day. The New Mexico police officer Darian Jarrett, who his life ended, he lost his life in a traffic stop. He had 3 children and a family. It is true, when police officers go out in the line of duty and work, they don't know if they're going to come home. That is an important. So you had Darian Jarrett, a New Mexico police officer, who lost his life. And if you see the video, it's just horrifying. Why am I trying to give people vantage points that seem to be contradictory in today's polarized, media-driven world? Because they're not. I can support law enforcement and understand, the sacrifice of a noble, honorable officer like Darian Jarrett, and respect, law enforcement officials and law enforcement, and understand what they do and respect them, while at the same time saying, okay, what Chauvin did was different. I'm not going to stop going to the hospital because of medical malpractice. I'm not going to stop hiring an attorney because of legal malpractice. I'm not going to stop, hiring an accountant or a financial advisor because of because of Bernie Madoff. I'm not going to stop respecting law enforcement because of people like Chauvin. And I think there needs to be some kind of understanding that, okay, what happened, I believe that George Floyd was murdered because it doesn't really matter. It's not relevant whether or not he had narcotics in his system, or a criminal record, or he used a $20 bill that wasn't real. It's one important element here is that a person of color called the police. Okay, a person considered a person of color who owned the store called the police. That is missing from the left-leaning narrative. But what happened here is that he couldn't breathe. I believe Eric Garner, that in New York, he was murdered, and I wrote about that in the Huffington Post. I think that we should have learned from what happened with Eric Garner. That was in 2014. That was during President Obama's administration. Democrats did nothing. Democrats are doing nothing now in terms of federal legislation. They might have a piece of legislation out there, but there should have been a push and a focus to say, okay, if a person says he can't breathe, that was Eric Garner's last words. If we learned from Eric Garner, we wouldn't have had witnessed what took place with George Floyd. There needs to be some kind of federal standard where if a human being, man or woman, is on the ground subdued, then the law enforcement officials hears I can't breathe, then and look, there are other situations where, yes, the African American and Black community face this more so than any other community, and that has to be addressed within Democratic strongholds like Minneapolis. Okay, then you had the officer, the female officer, pulling the Glock out instead of the taser and using and shooting this. That's another horrible tragedy. See, again, officers don't do that. I can support law enforcement and say that woman is guilty in my mind, and very likely will be found, or I don't know, in her trial. But there's Tony Timpa. Same thing happened. So he lost his life. He said he couldn't breathe, or he just couldn't breathe. And federal judge tosses excessive force suit against 5 Dallas officers. So in Tony Timpa's case, Timpa's family alleges that the officers, 4 of whom remain on the force, the same type of thing happened, but we have a person of a different background. Media doesn't. The media response is a bit different. Granted, yes, this happens. This brutality, the African American and Black community face more so than other communities. However, police brutality affects everybody, all people of all backgrounds. Tony Timpa is an example. At the same time, I think that what I'm trying to tell you is you fix police brutality, but you also continue to respect the good men and women, the hundreds of thousands of men and women throughout the country, the vast majority that live their lives, that do their work with honor, integrity, who risk their lives, like that, noble officer and hero Darian Jarrett, who was gunned down in New Mexico with because of a traffic stop, a very, very violent criminal. And so there needs to be some kind of context and nuance. In American society today, everything is politicized. Everything's politicized. And you can't express a rational and logical viewpoint is you don't defund hospitals because of medical malpractice. You don't defund police because of, a Derek Chauvin. I look at police officers, I say, okay, every police officer that I see is as noble and as honorable as Darian Jarrett, or, risks his or her life every single day in the manner that Darian Jarrett did, and might not come home to his or her family. Understanding that, you might say, well, you're white, and, whenever I am, have been stopped by police in my life, it's yes, sir, no, sir. It's like, God bless you, give me a ticket if you need to, that's not saying that anyone deserves anything, or, the rebuttal for George Floyd by people is, well, if he wasn't resisting arrest, then he would be alive today. This is true. The rebuttal for a lot of incidents as well, if they weren't resisting arrest, that is true, but that's not relevant when you are on someone's knee that long, and you're saying I can't breathe. So you're being told that, and especially with George Floyd, he was saying that he was losing his life. So that is an isolated incident that shouldn't be, where you have Chauvin that doesn't represent all police officers. He just doesn't represent all police officers. He represents, somebody who committed a heinous atrocity. Just like the other Minneapolis police officer who took out it's horrendous. It's atrocity. Took out the Glock instead of the taser. But what happened today was justice. I do think, though, that it's dangerous that we have a society. A great many people were thinking that the whole place was just going to implode, and very peaceful protests would lead to $1 to $2 billion in property damage and 19 lives lost, according to Wikipedia. Again, if the verdict was not all guilty, that is not a good situation in the country. That doesn't help anything. That only makes things worse. But Congresswoman Maxine Waters might have given Chauvin the ability to appeal this, because what she stated was essentially get confrontational. Then Pelosi said, well, within the context of a certain, civil rights movement, and it's like nobody understands context and nuance when they hear that word, especially whenever Trump, when they said, there's so much hypocrisy. You had a woman, unarmed woman, who was at the Capitol, lost her life. Nobody on the left cares. You have the police officer who lost his life. We found out that it wasn't because of, the maniacal Trumpers, quote unquote, not saying that that's the way they're painted. It was a tragedy. Those people should be alive today, but you don't see the outrage with the woman that, and that shouldn't have happened. That was a horrendous tragedy at the Capitol that should not have happened. I condemn that, but on the left, you don't see the outrage that an unarmed woman was shot by a police officer. And then the police officer is championed, which, God bless him, he should be championed, because that the scenario, sorry, not the person that shot Ashley Babbitt, the officer that lost his life should be championed, because it was a horrendous situation. But we learned that he didn't lose his life from any direct involvement with any of the people that day. From what I understand, if I'm wrong, then I will, update this. But the comments, of course, will be no comments for this segment. But there's hypocrisy. You don't see the same. You see the officers championed, then you see officers demeaned by media and left-leaning activists when there's other instances, and you don't see the outrage that a woman who was unarmed lost her life. Again, there's hypocrisy on both sides of the issue. Tremendous hypocrisy. Maxine Waters said, get confrontational. This is right after accusing Trump of inciting and compelling people to get confrontational. So, anyway, my point to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that life is complicated. If you are listening to anyone that gives you one vantage point, full steam, without any reflection, because I'm trying to reflect here. I'm saying, look, I support law enforcement, but then I also support the Chauvin verdict, and here's why. And I'm also saying that there's a tremendous amount of hypocrisy and a tremendous amount of political agenda, and emotions sell. Emotions equal currency in our country and in the world. You sell newspapers, you sell advertising time on cable stations by promoting the most emotional vantage point while ignoring any other vantage point. So instead of saying we need to fix the issue of police brutality, and it's, oh my God, defund the police, oh my God, say disparaging and negative things about all law enforcement, and not simply say, continue to respect law enforcement because they risk their lives, which is true, which should have been the case. Like, all people had to do, Democrats or activists or anyone, say, look, there is a problem with police brutality. At the same time, you don't have to defund police. You can actually continue to respect and acknowledge the risk that they take every single day, while at the same time addressing police brutality. That could have taken place in our society. It would have been the most productive thing. But again, you don't have media focusing on what's productive. You have media focusing on what makes the most money. Give me your thoughts below. Actually, don't give me your thoughts below. I keep on forgetting that with these segments, I'm not going to put the comment section. But hit subscribe right now. The whole thing could be overturned because of Maxine Waters. That is actually the worst thing that could ever have happened for justice for George Floyd was that Maxine Waters stated what she did yesterday, right before the verdict. Give me your thoughts below.